Welcome to Curious Joel, a show about curiosity taking us deeper into the topics of people's passion and interesting conversation. I'm your host, Joel Circo. Now, if you want a couple things really quick, you might notice that I don't sound quite normal. I'm working through a head cold. Well, I'm not working through a head cold. I have a head cold right now, throat's a little sore, but I have a lot of time, and I realize that I've been doing my podcast for a little over 2 years. And one thing that I felt like I needed to do was explain to you my podcast. Now, so my our special guest today is Joel Circo himself. So I wanted to go through a few things and explain it. I basically want to interview my own self, same way I would do with any other guest on my show. Give you guys all the answers that I ask everybody that's come on my show, or most of the people that have come on my show. So without further ado, my interview with myself. So starting off with, what is my passion? I love to learn. So if I were to describe my passion simply, it would be learning. I love to learn about everything. My wife gets annoyed oftentimes because she'll ask me a question. She just wants a simple answer, but I go off down the rabbit hole, off the deep end, going, okay, but here's technically, but on the other side, some experts say, but technically, and then, well, on the other side, if you do believe them on that specific subject, all of that fun stuff. Also, if there's some dead space, if there's some dead space in here that I don't edit out very well, it's probably me sneezing or coughing. I also have a runny nose, so please bear that in mind as we go. Sorry. But yeah, so I love to learn. I always have. I've mentioned this before on my podcast, but I'm that kid that read the dictionary for fun. I always like learning new words, learning how our language worked, why certain words are related to each other and other words aren't. Brian Regan has a whole thing on plurals and why certain plurals are some way and some plurals are the other way, and all the different rules that are not quite as effective as people think they are for spelling and stuff like that. Like, all of that has interested me for as long as I can remember. But as I got older, my curiosity never stopped. My curiosity, I cannot foresee a time when I won't be curious. I won't be wanting to learn more than the average person. Now, there's plenty of people out there that probably know more, want to learn more, and have learned more than I have in my time. But bringing that into podcasting, my knowledge, as much as I love to learn, I also like to share that knowledge with others. I also, despite what some people in my life might think or say or joke about, I also like to make people's lives easier. Okay. Now, I know that there's a lot of people in this world that'll say some snide comment about, like, well, but he doesn't do a great job with that. But every mistake that I've made, that I can think of right now, or the major ones, have been trying to help other people. Even if you look at it and you were like, there's no way that was trying to help somebody, it was me doing my very best in my own brain way, trying to help somebody. Now you combine that knowledge that I have with making people's lives easier. Well, there's only so much that I can tell people that is going to help people. I originally started this podcast. Oh gosh. 2016, it would be the initial start of when I started, quote unquote, trying to podcast. And that was with a YouTube channel, which, if you ever see my name on something that I signed in with Google with, and I haven't changed it, you'll see, and if you look up this name on YouTube, you'll find this channel of Joel Rants. Okay. I was originally going to be doing this podcast as, like, I was going to do YouTube videos of just me just going on rants about why people need to know certain things, why people need to think about things differently, or how we need to approach certain situations, or conversations that we as a society need to have. Okay. I started this a long time ago, and just making YouTube videos and trying to post them and edit them, it was more than I was ready for. Was making a regular routine of making YouTube videos of me ranting about something, but also I didn't think people would want to watch it. Okay. I just didn't think that it was something that people wanted. I thought it was just a kind of an ego trip for me of like, well, I can be famous on YouTube or whatever. Um, Fast forward a long time, and I was approached by a friend of mine to do a D&D podcast. Okay. I've talked about this. Gosh, I need to stop saying K. Anyway, uh, talking about the D&D podcast, was approached to do a paid podcast. I've always thought voice acting was fun and cool, and I like playing Dungeons and Dragons, so getting paid to be a voice actor on a real play podcast sounded really fun. Didn't have any of the equipment, but again, I was getting paid for it, so I was able to buy a computer. I was able to buy a microphone. I, through that process, learned how to edit audio using Audacity. I learned how to set up a mic, keep things quiet. Yeah, I learned all the hard skills to do podcasting. I did a lot of research. Again, loving to learn everything I can. I learned a lot about how to do a podcast. I did a lot of research, learned how to set up my microphone a certain way, set up my computer a certain way, how long it took to do certain things. And then when that podcast fell apart, it was different. I've talked about it before. There's certain things that just happened that were not conducive to running a podcast smoothly. I realized that I had this equipment, this excitement, and this knowledge. And I thought about it a lot about like, okay, what could I do? I could do my own podcast. That was like the first thought of like, I've got all the equipment, I could do my own podcast, or maybe I could finally get into voice acting. And so I looked at voice acting a lot, but it's hard to catch a break, especially when to do a good, or just submit a good recording for voice acting. You had to be able to have a lot of specific voices, or show your range, or how well you handle a script. And writing scripts is not my thing. And so I kind of backed myself out of that for the time being. Well, okay, voice acting is probably not for me right now. And that does not mean it's out of the question permanently, but for the time being, voice acting was not in the cards. But I started thinking about my Joel Rants YouTube channel and going, okay, well, somebody might not want to sit there and watch me talk about something with whatever, like in my backyard or whatever. But I know a lot of really cool people with interesting jobs. And that's where I started, was jobs. Just, I know I've talked with a lot of people throughout my life about how they got where they are, what led them to this spot in their life. How in the world did you get there? Where do you even start that process? When do you start that process? Because I was in a job at the moment that I did thoroughly enjoy, but it wasn't like I was seeking out that career. I wasn't going, well, I'm going to be a activities manager at a summer camp, or a camp. I wasn't going, I'm going to be a ropes course manager. I'm going to save people's lives. It was something that I got a job, and then I learned really quickly how to do that job really well. I fell in love with the processes of taking care of the equipment. I learned all the intricacies of everything, and it was a good fit for quite a while. but it wasn't a plan that I had to do that. I love that job a lot, but a lot of these people I'm seeing, like, you do this really cool stuff really well. Like, is that something you like dreamt that you wanted to be since you were a kid? Because for me, if I were to tell you all the, like, just list all the things that I wanted to be as a kid, my gosh, you would be sitting here all day with all the things. I'm like, ooh, I could be this. Ooh, wait, I could be that. Oh, well, I don't want to do that part. But you know what I could do is I could do this. Like, you name it, I probably wanted to do it at some point in my life. Whether it's a lawyer, a pharmacist, a sewage worker, like every single one of these different jobs, I've had different parts of my life where I thought those jobs were so cool. And then one day it kind of dawned on me, like, I have this passion to learn. I also have this really good, like, because of how I learn, the driving force behind my learning is why. Now, that's not always the question that I ask, but it's a core question of why. Why does it work that way? Why did you get into this? Why are you still doing it? Why don't you quit? Why? It's one of the questions that we ask when we're small children, and I feel like a lot of people grow out of that. I know that I haven't had a lot of people that in daily life that ask that question, and I'm somebody that still asks that. In fact, I've learned how to even process that question into the adult business world of the paradigm. What is the decision-making process behind this? That is going, why do we do this, and when do we know why we do this? Or why do we do this when? The paradigm is something that I've used a lot in my career, in my life as an adult, instead of asking, well, why? Because that sounds, a lot of times it can sound childish, especially when you've dealt with a lot of people that kind of deal with things childishly. So I've learned to use the word paradigm, or the thought process behind a paradigm. What is the decision-making paradigm behind this? Also, I just have to shout this out. Shout out to the Sahara movie, because that is one of the places that I picked up on that phraseology of, when are we gonna have to stop and rethink our decision making paradigm, from Al Giordino and talking to Dirk Pitt. Anyway, but that driving force of why does all this happen? Why did you get here? So you take the why, you take all these different jobs that I know people do, and I want to enlighten the world on things that I have learned, but I'm not a professional in that area. I can quote everything, but I don't have the credentials for it. And whereas I can get the gist across, the basic idea across, I didn't have the in-depth knowledge to be able to teach others these things. So I realized that it's not going to just be a podcast of me sitting here droning on about, why I like Pokemon, or why I think escape rooms are cool and what they do is really cool. Like, who the people that design them are really cool, right? I wanted to make sure that this is an interactive thing. Also, not gonna lie, statistically speaking, podcasts with guests oftentimes do better than podcasts without guests. There's a lot of the subjects and statistics go into how that works and stuff like that. But I also, like I said, primarily wanted to make sure that you're talking to someone that knows what they're talking about, not just some guy that researched it for too long. And so instead of me just talking about it, you got to hear from somebody that got into escape room design. You got to hear about that person's process as they go from accidentally picking a college course to becoming a really cool graphic design artist. So I want to make sure that people are getting the information from the source. I realized that I needed the structure of, I'm interviewing somebody, but I didn't want it to be a stuffy, send them questions ahead of time, and then they have a chance to write down or research their answers, because that doesn't feel right. That didn't feel like how I learned. Like, I mean, it didn't feel like how I learned things. And I know that I've listened to those types of interviews before, and it doesn't sound fun. It sounds rehearsed. It sounds dry. Um, and I know some of my favorite things that I've heard were the off the cuff answers that people give, because it means that it's fresh, it's alive, it's breathing. And I know that for me, my answers when I am asked a question on the spot versus when I have time to rehearse and practice it are very different. And so I wanted to make sure that these felt like real conversations. These felt like I sat down with this person and I wanted to know, not just to give you guys specific answers to things, but I wanted to make sure that you felt like it was a real conversation, because it was. But I wanted it to feel that way. I wanted you to feel like you were part of that you were having all of your questions answered as well, because I know I have definitely listened to interviews where I'm like, okay, but what was that big word he said? Or what was that acronym he said? I don't understand that. And they don't follow it because maybe they were a professional in the area and they're like, well, I know what Roth IRA is, so why would I have to have them clarify for that? Like, I want to make sure that people are getting this information, no matter what age they're at, that hopefully, if I'm doing my job well, that anybody listening to this podcast can hear and understand what's going on. That I'm not gatekeeping information based off of your vocabulary. And don't get me wrong, I know I use some big words sometimes, and I don't necessarily intend to do that. But I wanted to make sure that it's accessible for everybody, that anybody can listen to my podcast and go, okay, I think I got everything that they said, and I think I understood it. And, but I also wanted to make sure that I was trying to engage with the guests too. I wanted to make sure that the guests understood that they are a part of this podcast, that the listener, the person hearing this thing, is thought of when things are being said. And you'll notice that in my interviews, if they gesture or they give something that was a visual, I try my best to describe it and make sure that they know what's going on. And then I was like, when it comes to editing, that also plays a really big role into like what I'm doing. Because when I'm editing, I'm trying my very best to make sure it's not this nice, neat little package that I'm delivering to you. It is this real conversation. The only times I really edit out pieces of conversation are when a guest was like, hey, actually, I don't want that publicized. I don't want that out there for everyone to hear. I answered that, but I didn't think about the ramifications of how I answered that. And then the other thing is, just if it's just long dead silence or kind of mumbling or something happened and we all got distracted, but like it's mostly silences that were edited out and mistakes of what was said that they didn't want repeated. But other than that, most of what you're getting is this cleaned up audio. Like the sound waves, I'm trying to get rid of as much background noise as I can, depending on where I was recording. I'm trying to give you a clean listening experience, but the actual, like the speech, I'm not taking anything out of context. I'm not, trimming stuff down for time, as you can see by some of my longer episodes. So I wanted to make sure that as people are listening, they feel like they're there. I've seen interviews and podcasts where it's these nice, clean little clips. You see that all the time with like YouTube reels and TikToks and all the other short form stuff of like they segment these small phrases together. It's like, well, I don't know what they were talking about actually. I can assume, but I don't know what they were talking about. But with my podcast, I want to make sure people knew what was going on. So when I was designing my podcast, I wanted to make sure that it was something that is real, it was honest, and it's a conversation, it's personal. And so I designed this whole thing around really understanding what makes someone tick in their profession or their passion. Because not everyone I've interviewed was a professional in their industry. Sometimes they're hobbyist, but I realized that by itself wasn't enough, because not everyone can get paid for what they do, but they still have this enormous passion, this deep understanding that is a major part of who they are. And so that's why that my intro isn't just people's passion, it's also interesting conversations, because I know a lot of people that have interesting things to say, just not in a professional setting, or not a professional setting yet, even. I've had Braden Slens, who's I'm looking forward to when he is an adult making movies, and I gotta go watch some of those movies. He's not a professional yet, but he's making some really cool stuff right now. I'm in that position of, technically this is just a heavily dedicated hobby that I have. Now, do I want to be a full-time podcaster? Absolutely. Is it difficult this moment? Yes. Do I have enough support? No. But I want to make sure that this is something that is this is a focus of mine. This is something that I have invested in over and over again. This is a continual investment that I have made over the last 2.25 of a year or something like that. And I've taken breaks here and there due to just time restraints, but it's still something that is primary in my focus. And I wanted to make sure people like that aren't being overlooked just because they're not getting paid for that. But and one step further was that sometimes there's just things that I just want to talk about. That's why I had this whole conversation about just how people think, like the process of thinking, how people take vacations, depression, how that affects somebody. Those things that are there, you can't be a professional, in those areas exactly, but they have interesting things to say. Let me rephrase that last thing, because that's not technically not correct. But I don't want it to just be professionals. Like, I don't want to have philosophers on, because just professionals have that is limiting who can talk about it. So that's what I meant by, like, it's the professional thing. Sorry. One thing about head colds, I'm sorry for this, another footnote, but my head colds also make my brain a little bit foggy, so I do apologize for that too. But to clarify, I didn't want it to just be professionals, and some of the things that I talk about, I didn't want it to just be professionals, limited to professionals in the industry. So there are professional thinkers. There are people that study depression professionally. There are people that, do all those things professionally. I don't want to limit it to just those people, though. Now, so that's why it is interesting conversations, not just hobbies. It is, I wanted this to be a place that people can expect to learn something, to grow as a person, to grow in their understanding of how this world works and what goes on in people's minds as they're doing a job. Make other people in this world real to us that see. I mean, again, going back to like all the media, we see a lot of things about NPCs, non-playable characters, as we go through our life, and we see these other people as non-playable characters in a video game. They're just your background characters if you're more into movies. They're just, that's the shopkeep. Anyway, he has 5 lines, he says, and then if you keep asking him questions, he's gonna just keep repeating those 5 lines. But I want to make sure people understand that these are real people that have a drive behind them. I've interviewed people that have these very off the norm jobs, like the escape room artist, like not artist, escape room design artist. You don't meet those every day. That's not something that I'd ever met somebody before that said they could say they had that job. But it's a job. It's a job that people have. No one ever thinks about it. No one ever like who's designing these. But on the entirely other scale, other side of that scale, I have somebody that has this nearly uh like almost what you might think of when you think of a cubicle job of 9 to 5 financing. Yes, he runs his own company, but if you talk about something like, oh, he works for financing, like investments, and is like, okay, like stockbroker? No, not a stockbroker. Not like Wall Street. It's like, oh, so like a 9 to 5 cubicle job. Well, kind of, I guess, like a regular office job. Yep, it's a white collar job, white collar. But those people also can love what they do very, very much. And so you have all this whole spectrum of people that I wanted to make sure that when you're interacting with these people, that there's something behind them, because it's really easy to go like, well, it's just a cook at a camp. That's not what they really want to be doing. It's like, well, they do like cooking. They really are passionate about cooking. Yes, they're not making filet mignon for every dinner and, making these gourmet meals, but he's trying. He's doing the best he can for the price that people are paying. With the financing, like he's not like he's doing what he can, and he's doing what he loves and what he loves to help other people do. And I wanted to make sure people are seeing that. People are seeing each other for what each other are. Now, not everyone in this world is this extremely passion driven, fireball of love for their job or their hobby. And there's also some people out there that, despite their passion, they're not very good at vocalizing that. And I've had a few people in here that I've had to work a little bit harder to get that information out of them, their passion out of them. Even though they really love it, they're kind of quiet and they're a little bit more reserved and a little bit more shy and not very good at talking about themselves. And I try my very best at asking them the questions that will help them come out of their shell more. But there's a few people that I haven't interviewed because until I can develop the right set of questions, and I believe that they can answer those questions with a passion, with a fire behind them, I don't want to force them into this conversation that they're not going to be excited about. Because if they're not excited about what they're doing, or at least they don't think there's anything to be excited about it. I've had a few people that, whether it was an artist that was having was in a spot where they didn't feel like they could have a full conversation. They couldn't spend an hour talking about this. Now, I don't require you to spend an hour on my podcast, but I would like that nope, that's the wrong word. I would like to feel like they could talk about it for an hour. If they don't have that idea that they can actually have this full-fledged conversation about what they do, I don't want to put them up in a spot where they're not going to feel like they represented themselves well. I don't want to be in a spot where, like, my listeners are going, do they actually care about what they do? And I've had people on that they don't feel that full hour conversation that I'm normally aiming for. And that's okay. Almost every one of those that I can think of off the top of my head that I've interviewed, I could sit and talk with them for an hour or two just on whatever subject it was that we were talking about. Sometimes it's time restraints that take up that. Sometimes it's distractions. Sometimes it's I didn't develop the questions well. Sometimes they're having an off day. Sometimes I'm having an off day. But they have that ability that they could actually talk about it to other people and go, yes, this is what I do and I love it. But with that being said, now I apologize if my train of thought is not what it should be. But I try and make sure that you guys are getting what you are looking for in this podcast, that you are learning, your curiosity is being satiated whenever you listen to this podcast, that even when I'm having an off day, that you still feel like you understand more about what they do. Okay. That at the end of the day, hey, these people struggle with this. And that even though they love this job so much, not every single aspect of it's going to be their favorite part. Now, not every single aspect is going to be the least favorite part either, And I try and be very honest with myself about, how I see my own podcast. And I I've done a terrible job of asking my own questions to myself directly. But I'll go through that right now really quick. Catch up to where I see we have gone so far, because I've started with what's my passion. Where did it start? Was my YouTube channel. That journey that took me from that stupid YouTube channel that I think has like 5 videos. One of them's of me rollerblading and doing weird rollerblade tricks. What keeps me going is that curiosity, that insatiable curiosity. And I feel like I've gone pretty in depth with what each of those steps kind of look like. And what pushed it into the spotlight for me, that driving force, is that I want more people to know what I needed to learn for this podcast. The skills that I need to learn were editing, learning software, learning what a DAW, a digital, digital audio workstation, I believe is what it is. But Audacity, Isotope, whatever it is that you're using. For me, I learned how to use Audacity and Isotope. Those are 2 different softwares that I use. Audacity is free, and since it was free and it was common, there's a lot of YouTube videos you can do to learn anything you want to use with it. That's what I learned for the Role Playing Junkies podcast. So that's where I started with. And then I found this other one called Isotope, and it has some really cool tools that I use to make sure that this audio quality is better. So I learned a lot about that. The other thing that I'm still learning and I need to do better on is the actual promotion of my podcast. Learning how to properly tag each episode with different things, that when people are looking for certain things, they can find this podcast. Learning how to engage with my audience so that my audience isn't just listening going and then messaging me going, well, here's what I think, Joel, as your friend, but going on to whatever platform it is that they listen to and going, hey, I really like this. Here's 5 stars. And hey, here's my comments. Here's, I shared this episode with somebody. Engaging with the audience is something I'm still learning to do. That's something that, as I have tried to transition into actually making money off of this with my Patreon for Curious Joel. I'm trying to do better about promoting that and making sure people know about it, in both on my podcast and in real life, trying to talk to people and be like, hey, you can go on and support what I'm doing financially for pretty cheap. I think it's $5 a month, something like that. And I get a little extra that I can invest back into this podcast, that I can invest into my microphone setup, a new laptop that can actually run things a little better and it's not half broken. But learning how to promote that has been something that's difficult, because with my ADHD, it is hard to go, oh, this is a time that normal people are on social media. Let me post something right about now so they actually see it in their feed, instead of it getting a lot buried under, 3 hours of posting, or right before I go to bed, which is when everyone else is fast asleep. And then there's a whole 8 hours before anyone else is going to see that. So trying to post when I need to post, trying to tag things with relevant tags for people to see things, remembering to post clips of my episodes that I've released. So those are things that I'm learning still. And then let's move on through the questions. One of my new ones that I'm actually really proud of is, how much time do you spend on this? And that's a very interesting question to answer, especially right now, coming off of a long hiatus. But I would say on an average week, I think I would spend, well, okay, let me just break it down into 2 weeks, because that's how often I should be posting, is once every 2 weeks. So in a 2-week period, I think that I spend about 24 full hours on any given week working on this. Excuse me. So I usually spend about I'd say about an hour to 2 hours writing questions for an interview beforehand. That's one of the easiest ones to kind of like segment that hour to 2 hours, just writing questions curated to the guest, making sure that for each guest, because this is how my brain works, I have to make sure that each guest, I'm having the pre-interview icebreaker slash noise test, mic check, and control questions to kind of get in the flow of, how do I actually interact with people? How to set up the flow of the interview. Making sure that I'm going over what the flow looks like, how I'm going to start it. Every single episode, I start with a live recording of the intro, and I also do a live outro right there with the guest. If you've been listening to me for a while, you've probably heard my guests interact sometimes with my outro. But even adding in each interview, going, did you ask about any social media that they want to promote? Making sure I ask that beforehand. If I'm at all concerned about how to say their name, making sure that I have heard them say it, they have heard me say it, and they approve of how I say it, not give me some like, well, that's close enough. I've had a friend on that I mispronounced the last name, and it was embarrassing, and I'm like, well, I'm not doing that again. So each time I write a series of questions out, every single part of the intro and the outro I've written down so that I don't forget it. So even though I can quote my intro by heart, I still, just because of the off chance that I forget for a moment what my entire opening line is, or my intro of, hi, welcome to Curious Joel, that whole spiel right there, which, case in point, I stopped right there because I went, wait, what was the rest of it? But I forgot what the rest of it was. I started saying it as a joke, going, I can go through this, and then went, wait, it's, hi, welcome to Curious Joel, I'm your host. Nope, that's not it. But like I have those moments where I've started an episode and gone, wait, and I don't want to have to like flip through my papers and go, wait, where's my intro? Shoot. I want to be able to go, hey, it's right here on this page. I can read that. Here's my intro. And welcome. Enter guest name. And Joel Circo, thank you for joining me today. How are you doing? Good. Okay, cool. What is your passion? I want to make sure that the structure's there so I can go through and I can make sure that I'm not missing anything. And that even goes all the way through my questions, all the way to the end, where I'm going, hey, did I forget anything? Did I not give you time anywhere? Is there a question you wish I had asked? All the way to the end. So I spend, like I said, 1 to 2 hours writing questions before an interview. Before that is probably, I try and message at least a handful of people every week to try and set up times. And then I'll message them a couple times, and if they don't answer, then I'll wait a couple months and message them again. There's been some people that I've been trying to get on since the beginning of this podcast. They just haven't had time that lined up with mine enough that we could actually record something. So it's just something that keeps going, well, eventually. But so once I actually get somebody that I'm like, okay, you're gonna be on my podcast, great. It probably takes another, I'd probably say another hour of messaging back and forth, or a call, to kind of settle details. So that is okay, because most people, well, not most. Let me give this a broad. A lot of the people that I have interviewed have had multiple passions that I've wanted to talk to them about. So my first thing that I want to establish is, what subject are we covering in that interview? Because I don't want it to be set up as a nebulous, we're talking about your passion. What's your passion? There's a few. It's like, well, that's not a great way to start off the focused, train of thought. Is, by the way, it's also hamburgers. It's like, oh, okay. So podcasting, hamburger. I've written questions all about your podcasting, but okay, hamburgers. We'll have to come back to that. So establishing the topic of the conversation is important. So establishing the subject, I usually try and clarify, because there's a lot of people that I know what they like and what they do, but I don't necessarily know how they like to refer to it. So I've had some people that have phrased things oddly. I mean, well, I can give you an example of my wife, which was a funny one, but when I asked her what her passion was, she said she likes to shoot people. Now, she was met with her camera, and she had a good laugh with that. But I've had people that I thought I knew what they were going to say, and the way they phrased it was completely different from how I thought they were going to phrase it. And that's one of the reasons I ask the questions, because I want to know, like, I know your job title is this, but what is your passion? What drives you? What is your focus? Because there's if I would just like to learn and like to teach and help others, I could be a professor. No, I have to go to college a lot of other stuff that go with that. But I could have pursued a teaching degree, like my brother did. My oldest brother, he's a history teacher. My other brother was an adjunct professor for a little bit. But I could have gone into a professional career in teaching, which is learning and then reteaching, but that's not it. So that phraseology is important. That the way I ask that thing is important to how I write questions. So if someone's talking to me about, well, I'll use some examples of things that could have changed the entirety of how I write questions. Let's go back to John Jacobs. If he had phrased what his passion was differently, that conversation could have taken a very interesting turn away from what we actually talked about. We could have been talking about more about the medical side of things, versus if his focus was on, oh, well, I just like anatomy, and sparse tools. It's like, okay, so that's why you do the wilderness survivals, because anatomy and sparse tools, that's a whole different line of questioning than the safety and helping people and all of that was his focus. If I'm trying to think of another good example, Well, I mean, take my brother Ben. If his passion wasn't about the design aspect and was, he even talked about it of uh, other balloon artists have different aspects that they like about being a balloon artist, and those people I would write different questions for, slightly different questions um, for them. So that conversation before we even get to a recording stage is important, that I'm making sure that I'm getting the details right about what I'm talking about. What is there something that I want to ask but they don't want me to ask? Um I've had a few times where I'm like, well, do you want to mention your book? And some of them are like, yes. Some of them will say no, but there's sometimes I have information that I don't know if they want me to use or not. So clarifying that. And then it's setting an actual date, setting a time and location and um, what they need ready for. So a lot of that is prep work of if it's at their place, what do I need to bring to set up? I know I'm bringing my microphones. I know I'm bringing my laptop. Do I need to bring a table of some sort to set everything up on? What do I need to bring to get that situated? So like that whole pre-interview conversation, whether it's messaging or talking on the phone, that can take up to an hour. And then actually recording, if I record a hour-long episode, usually what I tell people is set aside about 2 hours. I say that for a couple reasons. One is I have to set up first, set up the microphone. I have to do audio checks to make sure that the microphone that I'm using is balanced so that it's getting both of us equally, that, one of us not like super far in the distance and like really quiet and like, yelling, and the other person's like right up in your ear. So trying to make sure that it sounds balanced so that it makes a little less work for me on the back end of it. Okay. So the setup, takes a little bit. Then obviously recording, I do some questions beforehand. Sometimes the audio checks take a while to get that dialed in, literally speaking. Well, and then there's the actual recording. The recording is hard to determine. I usually chalk it up to about an hour. It sometimes takes a little longer, sometimes a little shorter, and then there's the teardown, and then I try and export that audio while I'm there, because I've had a scare once where the audio did not, almost didn't export properly, and I almost was going to have to throw out the entire thing. So I always make sure I export it right there so I know that the files are safe and secure, that I don't have to go like, oh, well, okay, so it didn't work. Do you have time today, or are we rescheduling for another time? Then we have the editing process. So after I have recorded it, guest has gone home, or I've gone home, or we both gone home, however it works that day. Then there's a time that I have to go through. I have to listen to the episode, usually once all the way through. That first time I'm taking notes of, okay, there was that sound there was that sound there, that there's this empty silence there, editing it to the best of my ability, then listening once I've gone through, after I listen to it once, going through editing it again, to editing those things out so that I can make sure that it is nice and clean listening, easy listening for people. I take that, export that to my from Audacity to Isotope. Isotope is where I do all the sound editing, making sure that the background noise is eliminated as best as possible, that any of the harsher noises are dimmed down, that I'm equalizing out the two different voices. All of that is happening in Isotope. I also have to, I forgot. I also have to split the pre-interview questions separate from the rest of the interview. And I also have to clean that up separately as well. Then the first thing I do is I post those to my Patreon. I drop it in there so they can listen to it right away. Sometimes Patreon even gets a raw edit, the absolute raw audio dropped to them first, and then they get to listen to the actual episode later. But those are going straight to my Patreon as soon as I finish editing them. Then I am taking that information, like that audio, and I'm putting. Woo, sorry, my Italian hands hit my mic stand. But then I'm taking that audio, I'm putting it into my podcast host site, which is Libsyn, and then I'm building the actual episode. So I'm writing the description, writing all that. So the editing process, including exporting, which depending on how well my computer's working that day, I mean, the exporting process by itself, I've seen it take 24 hours to export a more edited episode, a longer, more edited episode, with whether it's the space, like the empty spaces that I've taken out, the background noise that I've reduced, or the tinkering with the various other settings that I have to tinker with. I have had a episode take 24 hours to render, just export and render. But I'm not actively counting that in my time. But then there's the writing the episode description, which I'm still learning that process of how long should an episode description be? What should it contain? How eye-catching does the title have to be? How eye-catching does the description need to be? How many tags should I put in? Since I stopped doing the episode numbers, trying to make sure that even though nobody's reading this, I'm putting in the actual episode number in the actual thing, because it, like, Libsyn requires me to put an actual episode number in. And then it's scheduling that to post on whatever day it is, or posting it as soon as I can, depending on how well I've scheduled my editing time and how scheduled my life was that week or 2 weeks. But the other time in there that isn't necessarily an allocated specific sit down time, like writing the questions, like editing or recording, is the thinking about who I'm going to interview next. What would I talk to them about? What are things that I know about that? And writing those down. I have a small little notebook that I take with me most places. It's my little book of podcasts is what I call it. And I'm writing down just ideas and the very rough sketches of interviews. And that takes up quite a bit of time here and there throughout 2 weeks. I'm spending a lot of time just going, I do know this jazz musician or someone related to a jazz musician that I would love to have them on my show. Okay, well, let me plant a seed and like just go, hey, how would they feel about this? Or me going and doing some research on, what have they done? What questions could I be asking them? Do I think that they'd be a good fit? Then there's always, I have a master list of base set questions. If you've noticed, which I would hope my listeners would notice, I do have a set of questions that I normally ask people. That changes. Not every single person gets asked all the same questions, but there's a lot of questions that I ask everybody, or most of everybody. And I'm always trying to improve that. Every time that I go through an interview or I'm going through my day and I go, wait a minute, this is a great question. Like that time, the time that allotted, how much time do you spend on this, was something I came up with my last interview. It was like, cause I think I saw it in my notes somewhere about something, and I was like, wait a minute, that actually helps me determine like how, like what does this take up of their time? Like what resources are they using on this as far as time goes? But so those things, that could be, 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, 20 minutes, 3 hours. One day I just sat down and I actually wrote a single page of base set questions. This is recently. But then there's also like research into what are some of the trends going on? Have other people improved their podcast? the rest of that is miscellaneous stuff that with my ADHD brain, I just kind of put places and I go, oh, well, I spent some time thinking about like, would this work as a setup? Can I do this as a setup? I spent, let's see, I think I spent about total of 5 hours just deciding whether I should do this episode or not. I was like, well, there's certain people that are gonna be like, well, it's just you talking. I don't want to listen to Joel talk for an hour or something, some odd minutes. But it's something that goes back to my passion of I want to make sure that I'm helping people learn and know things. And one thing that I know that I technically had an interview, but I realized that that interview was about me as a person, not necessarily me as a podcaster. And there's some level that we talked about that, but a lot of those questions went to me as a person. And I realized that for me, that didn't satisfy my criteria of did I do a successful interview, because I didn't do the interview. And no offense to Tom or Rose, they did a phenomenal job of asking questions about me. I hadn't given them the proper prompt of this is me as a podcaster. This is my curiosity. Where does my curiosity come from? Ask questions about that. And dive deep into that. But yeah, so like I said, that it's a little hard to quantify as far as like hard dedicated time spent in podcasting. Like I would say probably about, let's see, trying to do some math here. So 2 hours recording / setting up / tearing down. 2 hours. 2 hours writing questions. That's 4 hours. Hour just setting up the interview. That's 5 hours. And then editing. Editing can take, well, an hour to listen to an hour-long episode. And then it can take another hour to edit that. And then it can take another hour to kind of go through the sound and try to make sure that's set. So that's 6 or 7 hours. Hold on. 8 hours ish for a single episode in hard quantifiable, well, semi quantifiable time. I mean, there's some episodes that have been really good audio quality. Like my initial mic check has been really good. It's been solid. Like I haven't had to do any EQing. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about that word because I don't know how. I don't think I can clarify that word right now. And I didn't want to use a word that I couldn't describe, but like the background noise, the audio levels, all of that stuff. That's something that I didn't have to do much. So there's been times where it's been pretty short period of time for editing, and there's others that have just been difficult. And so that's where like the editing time is variable. It can be anywhere from an hour and a half to 5 hours. I've spent 5 hours editing a single episode, not those multi episodes. So I'll set that at 2 hours. So 2 hours editing, 2 hours recording, 2 hours writing, and an hour of prep for the episode. And then posting. I probably put that at about 8 hours for a single episode. Yeah. As quantifiable time, not the ambiguous. I was thinking about it and I was processing it and I was learning about podcasting, but like actual spent on in an individual episode. Now moving on to, the next question was, what does a day in the life look like? And I feel like I kind of went through that pretty well. If I do say so myself, I think I did a pretty good job of explaining what a day in the life kind of looks like as far as podcasting. But yeah, so what does a good day versus a bad day look like? A good day looks like coming in with the right energy, meeting with somebody with the right energy, and we just kind of plow through like all of these questions, we get way beyond anything that I had written down. I'm coming up with topical questions on the spot in every time they answer. I have another question that leads us deeper into things that they like, that they're excited that I asked the question, that it just kind of like layers on layers of curiosity going deeper and deeper. Milana Dodd is one of my favorite interviews that I've done, because that was like we went circle and circle, like layer. um and we just kept having to go like, wait, okay, so to circle back to what we started with, what was that? Okay, now to circle back from where we got into there, like the rabbit holes were in rabbit holes, and I love that dynamic. That was like one of my favorite interviews I've done, just because the flow of thought and conversation was amazing. um a bad day is when I'm sitting there and I'm having to kind of, I'm a low energy on a low energy day, or the person is just not engaging very well, and I'm having to like pry answers out of them, doing my best job to try and ask as many questions, or as good questions as I can, to really help them feel like they have something important to say. Those are rough days. Those are hard days, because it's, I'm sitting here, I'm trying to put in extra work in to getting these answers out, and it's one of those times where I feel like this was not a good day for them. This was not like an ideal moment for them. This interview should have been rescheduled, but we not always am I able to show up and go, oh, actually, this should be another day. A lot of the times I don't have many options as far as scheduling. Sometimes it's a very brief moment where I have an opportunity to interview somebody, and I don't know when the next time I'd be able to do that would be. But that would be a bad day, is the time when I feel like the answers that I'm trying to get are almost like pulling teeth. I in honesty, so like, sorry, my next question is, what was your best day and your worst day? Um Best day is a hard one. Like I said, Milana Dodds was an incredible day. At the end of it, like, I was so thirsty, my voice was so worn out. We were talking for so long, we weren't expecting it. um Rebecca Becca Lyles um was another one of those things that, like, our conversation went for ages, and we just were not expecting it to go that long. um Worst day. Worst day is a hard one. I've had some bad starts. There was one day that, for Joanne Bischoff, we got into the interview, a ways into the interview, before I realized that my mic was on mute. We got, like, I think 15 minutes into the interview before I realized the mic was on mute. I hadn't recorded a single thing. No, not mute. It was recording off my laptop. My laptop's microphone, which is nothing at all. And I'm like, well, we have nothing. I need to restart. I need to ask you these questions again. Try and still keep it, like, I had to restart the whole thing just because I had made a mistake. I I'm gonna be opaque with this, because as much as I like the honesty of things, I also don't want to badmouth guests by any means. But I've definitely had some interviews that the start was very difficult. That it didn't start off with this nice, smooth thing. I'll give you one example of it and what resulted from it. So one of my very first interviews was with Zach Sutterfield, and I had started with a very cold, just jumped right into it. I thought I'd gotten everything set up, so we just started talking. I hadn't clarified, what specific passion we were talking about, and I hadn't established any sort of flow of the conversation. I just kind of jumped in, and he wasn't exactly sure what we were doing. I wasn't exactly sure what we were doing. We were just like, we were kind of playing a fast and loose. That was a bad day. Now, halfway through it, we kind of got into a better flow. It moved a lot smoother, you know, but that was something we eventually actually, we recorded that a long time before I posted it. So he actually thought about it. And that was one of the few times I've re-recorded a decent chunk of things because he hadn't understood what we're doing. So now I have a process of, that's where I got the process of talking to somebody beforehand and going, hey, what is your passion? Specifically in reference to blank. But that's also where I develop my pre-interview questions that you can check out on Patreon, of establishing that question and answer response, that conversational flow, without it being something that's detrimental to anything. That if you're just listening to the episode, you're not going to hear most of that. You're just going to hear the flow that comes after that. But establishing that conversational tone beforehand helps with having that guest be a warm, friendly person that you're talking to, instead of, oh, hi, yep, I do. Anyway, having that conversational flow is something that developed from that rough, cold start that I used to start with. But like I said, that's not even bad. That's not bad mouthing the guest. It was just Zach wasn't sure what was going on. He hadn't heard an episode before. He didn't know what my thought was. So I had to work a lot harder at the beginning to get answers from him because I hadn't established that. But I've had a few interviews here and there that I've hit lulls in the conversation where I'm like, okay, I'm just having to struggle finding out where their passion comes from, because I've heard them talk about it and they have more passion than this. Where is that right now? But yeah. So what were skills you were surprised you needed? The skill I was surprised I needed. That's actually a difficult one. I think it was just I think the time management would be the honest truth, because I with ADHD, I do deal with time blindness. I don't realize how much time has passed. I don't realize how much time things take. So the taking a moment to actually work on the podcast, taking the time to actually, I haven't messaged them back in a while, or I haven't found anybody yet, and it's, I'm supposed to post today. I don't have anyone to talk to yet. Oops, I guess I'm just not posting anything today. But just I have a terrible habit of not realizing that I needed to set aside more time for something. And then, like I said, the social media side of things, of I need to be present in social media. I need to be posting about it. I need to be letting people know and reminding people, hey, by the way, come check me out over here. And I don't do that very well. But to the next question, what are the top 3 skills someone would need to be a podcaster? I would say primarily, in my opinion, and there's plenty of podcasts that work without this, but the skills that I would say is your own personal charm. If you don't think you have anything to offer, people aren't going to want to listen. No matter how interesting your conversation is, if you don't believe that you have something to offer, you're not going to sound interested in it. Second is the minimal technological skill to record. It doesn't take a lot. I know podcasts that have had success being recorded on phones. So minimal technological understanding of how to record audio and how to export it to wherever you're posting, whether it's YouTube, or, whatever. There's some really easy places to post episodes, but having a base understanding of how podcasts work, exporting audio and then the the feed that takes it from you posting it to other people being able to hear it. And then being able to have a rough idea, the skill of having a vision for your podcast. Like I said, I almost started with a YouTube channel ages ago, and I I had two of those three skills. I could have an outline of what I wanted to talk about. I had a passion for what I wanted to talk about, and I knew that I had something to offer. I just didn't have the enough knowledge to go, yes, I'm going to post on YouTube on a regular basis so that people actually see. But like that ability to plan content out is important. And there's plenty of people that will disagree with me on some, if not all, of those points. Now, as for what was easier than I expected, was most of the conversations. I thought I was going to have those rougher days, those harder times getting people to open up about stuff. Not because of any skill I lacked, but just I didn't expect people, like I expected that once some microphone's put in front of somebody that they were going to have a harder time opening up. But, and this is not me trying to brag or anything, but I do have a knack for helping people feel comfortable and open. And once I have established that, like the pre-interview questions, it got really, really easy for people to open up and feel like they could talk to me about whatever they needed to talk about. What was harder, like I said, is the time management. That was a lot harder than I thought it was. I was expecting. It was a lot harder than I was expecting. Because I didn't realize how much time was dedicated to just trying to find guests and trying to get people to feel like they had something to say. There's a lot of guests that I've talked to. They're like, oh, I don't think I could talk about that. There's a lot of times that I'm like, ooh, I could ask them, but I'm sitting there going like, I don't think they'd want to talk about that, and yes, I could ask them, but I don't want to ask them and then them feel obligated to come on and, you know, mutter something about why they picked the thing they picked. Um, but it was harder to find guests and get guests on and manage that time of taking care of the podcast. Um, my favorite part of being a podcaster, being Curious Joel, is learning. There's so many things that I have learned that I would not have guessed. There's so many perspectives that I've seen that I wouldn't have gotten to. I wouldn't have understood. I wouldn't have guessed. I wouldn't have dreamed of those things. But because I've had this opportunity to ask all these random people these random questions, or, well, these random people that I have picked specifically, super random, um, these very specific questions that are pointed at getting answers and finding out the reality behind things, I I absolutely love these things that I've learned and being able to share with people. It's been amazing. My least favorite part has been trying to self promote, trying to make that transition to from just it being a hobby that I'm, you know, investing in, to actually trying to make money off of it has been a whole lot harder. I mean, when I started that first podcast, the Role Playing Junkies, like it felt like it was like a get rich, like the real deal of how to get rich quick is you just make a podcast and then everyone listens to it, you get all the monetization money, and bam, you're sitting pretty. It is a whole lot harder than I thought it was going to be. There's a whole lot more that goes into the monetization of a podcast than I thought. And I'll be honest, that's why I now have a Patreon. Was I didn't start with a Patreon because I thought it was going to be easier to just, I'm going to talk to, um Audible, or talk to, any of the other places that every single YouTuber has a sponsor from. It wasn't until I realized, like, a lot of those places, they don't make money unless they have a certain number of people actually sign up for that using their specific promo code. And then having, if I wanted to go through my podcast hosting company, I have to have a certain number of downloads before they even will suggest me to people. And so if I don't have the listener base, I'm not making money. But if I'm not making money, I don't have as much time to dedicate to the social media and building my listener basis. And so it was after a long period of time going, well, why I'm not making money off of this? I'm spending money on them. I have a subscription. I have to my podcast host company, so I have to pay them every month to post my episodes, for them to send them to Spotify, to Apple Podcasts, to uh, Tidal, to Amazon, to all the different places you can listen to podcasts. I have to pay them to do that. But I realized that I could be making some money if I go to Patreon. And I am harping on Patreon because like I said, that is one of the things I am lacking in and trying to do better in, is I have a Patreon. It's, I think, $5 a month. It might be slightly less than that due to some new changes, but it's about $5 a month. You get to listen to the episodes before people. You get to listen to the before before things happened. I'm also working on, I'm trying to get more consistent with posting my special car talk episodes, where this is conversations that happen in the car. They're not relevant to anything necessarily. Sometimes I just have like 3 random questions that I pulled for people. Sometimes they're just kind of nonsense. But the car talk episodes, I'm also trying to post random videos that I take on there, so that and also the other thing is, I just invested in this Voicaster 2 studio bundle, and I posted test audio of that on my Patreon, and I asked people to vote on what settings they liked. Do they like the enhanced versions? Do they like the non-enhanced versions? You know, and they're helping build this podcast. I asked them if they have any questions they'd like me to ask. If I'm missing something, I'm asking them to put their input in. And so if you become a Patreon supporter of my channel, you are helping me invest in this. You're helping me realize my dreams, but you're also getting a lot of behind the scenes stuff. You're not just financially helping build this podcast, but you are also physically, intellectually helping me build my podcast. You are giving me questions, you're giving me support, you're giving me feedback that I haven't gotten very many other ways. But I that's why I'm pushing that so much. But it's hard. It's not easy to do that. Moving through my questions, I'm almost done. So are there any questions you wish people asked? Honestly, it'd be, what can I do to help? What can I do to support you? I like what you do is one thing, but just a simple rating my podcast, listening to episodes. I've had a few people that listen regularly, but listening to episodes are great, but listening to them and then rating them, uh, listening to them and then sharing them or recommending other people listen to it, helps a lot. Commenting on it if you can, um, subscribing. Like, honestly, just getting notified when I post new episodes is really helpful, because it gives you a reminder that, hey, by the way, he posted an episode today. I should check it out when I can. The what would be the best way to support you in this is a question that I wish I got a little more often. Yeah. Faux pas. Are there any faux pas that the audience should know about. I honestly can't think of, well, okay, no, I can think of a couple. One is the just the distance from the microphone is important. Like the outbursts of loud and stuff like that, which I'm guilty of. But the other one is your phone should be off, or not off, but like volume should be off. Because if my phone vibrates, you can hear it. If it rings, you definitely can hear it. Um, but just being mindful of the noise you're making, because if I start adjusting, you're hearing a lot of background noise that I'm gonna have to go through and edit out. I'm not gonna edit out that stuff, but like you can even hear my boom mic moving, which is not fun for an audience to listen to. Oh my gosh, I did too much. Hang on, I need to adjust this really quick because it's getting on my nerves. There we go. But like you can hear all that noise, and people don't realize like when they like set stuff down right next to the microphone, it makes noise. And if they drink water, if they move their keys, and they think that if they like grip it tight enough, it doesn't. Yeah. So like just the noise that you're making is important to pay attention to. As far as like a PSA, I think that it's like I think a lot of people think that a podcast is a big dedication, and it's not really a big dedication. Um, Also, I feel like I feel like a lot of people think that when I say podcast, they think that it's a video, and it's not. And I don't know why people think that immediately. They go, "Oh, I've watched a few podcasts." I'm like, okay, there are some podcasts that you can watch as well, but podcasting primarily, if you look at all the podcastings on the planet, most of them are audio. There's a handful that are video. And by the way, I have thought about moving to adding a video, but that requires a much larger investment. Um, but it's not just videos are not the only podcast. There's a lot of audio podcasts out there. Um, but yeah, I don't know if I actually answered that. Anything more here? PSA. I just there if you like a subject, here's the PSA. Sorry to go a little Michael Scott. Here's my toast. My PSA would be, if you like a subject, or if you want to know more about a subject, I can almost guarantee you can find a podcast on that subject, at very least one. But most subjects that I have looked into, I can find like a half a dozen podcasts talking about that very specific subject. I can find a dozen more that touch on that subject. But there's a podcast for that. People say there's an app for that. There's a podcast for that too. You can find a podcast on whatever it is that you're trying to figure out or learn about, or you like. If you like The Simpsons, I know there's a dozen podcasts that go through each Simpsons episode. One of them that goes through Simpson episodes with people that were on the episodes. You want a podcast about nonsense, just people deciding stupid decisions for you. There's a podcast about that. That can random trivia. Are British comedians better than American comedians? Whale songs, you name it, there is a podcast for that. And I think people don't realize that. Advice for do I have advice for anybody that maybe might be listening and this is their moment that they want to become a podcaster? Just start making content with whatever it is that you have. That's something that I'd wish I had done sooner, was just start. I don't need a ton of expensive equipment. I do spend money on equipment. I spent a decent amount of money on I spent some money on the laptop. I spent money on the microphones. Originally my Blue Yeti microphone and my boom arm and the shock mount and my pop filters And then I've spent more money on the Vocaster 2 and that microphone and those headphones and all that stuff. I've spent money on cards for asking questions. I've spent money on all sorts of stuff. But what I didn't realize was that when I started my YouTube channel ages and ages ago with my $120 camera, like stupid digital camera from Walmart, I think it was like a Fujifilm digital camera. Later, I also bought a Sony like Handycam that I also used for a little while, but like that was more than enough. With those things, had I actually put the time and effort in, I could have been doing this for so much longer with a lot more content to offer everybody that I've missed some of those opportunities now. But I could have just started. I could have been evolving to this point where I have this podcast and these extra accoutrements, the accessories that I have, but just start. You don't need a whole lot. And I just gave this advice to somebody on Reddit who was asking about stuff of like, do I do this or do I do that? The honest answer is just start, see what fits. I started with certain things and I don't do some of those things now. And I started by not doing certain things and I do now. Every time I make an episode, I am trying to refine that process. I'm trying to evolve my podcast. I'm trying to evolve my process so that as I move forward, it is only getting better. That is my goal. Do I achieve it with every episode? Not necessarily. Is that my goal? Absolutely. But just start. Start wherever it is that you have and don't be discouraged. If you find that this is not something you like doing, then maybe stop doing it. But if this is something you enjoy, whether you're getting the views, whether you're getting the money, just keep going. And that'd be the same advice that I'd give my younger self. If I had a portal to the past, I would say, well, I think one small minor thing would be, I would say invest in a better computer off the start. Just a better laptop. Mine met the minimum requirements to run Audacity. That was literally the specs that I was looking for. It could run Audacity well. Excuse me, which is not a high bar to pass, by the way. But then it would be just start. Interview whoever you can, whenever you can. But just start. Oh yeah, I answered this before. Any assumptions people make, I would say one is, again, the video podcasting. People are like, oh, where can I watch that? I was like, well, you listen to my podcast. Some people are fancy enough to have a watch, but I don't. And then I don't know. I feel like people make some interesting assumptions here and there about like what it means. About like some people think that because I when I say I'm a podcaster, they assume that I have this whole big old setup. Right now, I'm sitting on a bed with a boom arm attached to the like the shelf above the bed. My laptop is not professional. Like nothing about what I'm doing right now. It looks professional. It looks like I'm playing with toys that I just bought. I'm not even sitting in a nice proper posture. I'm like 1 foot's off the bed awkwardly. The microphone's in a weird position. Like nothing looks professional. But people assume that I have a studio or something like that. I'm like, no, I just record. Like I've been in people's houses. I've been, sitting in offices. I've sat at home on my couch. I've recorded all over the place. I don't have this big old professional setup. I have some professional-ish equipment, and then I take it. I have a functional setup, but some people think that I have this whole studio. And then I think the other thing is sometimes people think that I make money, and sometimes people just assume that it's just a stupid hobby that I just kind of don't care about and it's not going anywhere. So I think that people have a range of assumptions depending on what their experience with podcasting is. Now to the Magic Snap. Now, if I were to be able to just snap and have my ideal setup just happen right now, I think that would be I think that would be an actual studio. I think that would be a place that is set up like a nice soundproofing room, um, a place where I could do video podcasts, a place that like I could sit down with as many people as I would like to, and you know, have a panel of people to ask questions to. Um, if I'm being perfectly honest, it goes beyond just Curious Joel. It would be I I do want to do another real play podcast. I want to have a D&D adventure, that I get to run with people, whether I'm playing or DMing. I want to do one of those. Um, I have a few other show things that I want to do. Um, but I want to be able to invite people over to my space to sit down with me in a comfortable space that is built exclusively for interviewing people, for recording podcasts, for recording content and making content, um, and just a spot to be creative. I would love to have a spot like that. Shorter term, I would love to just have a setup that is easily mobile. Um, Something that like I said, I wouldn't mind having like a really simple video setup. One of the things I've been looking into, being very, very transparent and honest, is having one of those Insta360 X4s that record in 8K, 360 degrees, that I can just kind of set right outside of like right there and just have it record, and I can just kind of go in and edit it just for right now, just something that I can like mess with and play with. But just having it in an easily transportable situation where I can just throw in my podcast backpack and run out the door and be like, haha, I did it. But yeah, so that's kind of what I'm wanting right now, is just something very simple and straightforward that I can just I can have people scheduled out for weeks, maybe even the whole year. I have scheduled podcasts, and I'd have episodes ready to go, locked and loaded, pre-recorded. Not pre-recorded. Obviously they're all pre-recorded, but like having episodes on deck. So I have, 5 weeks of episodes that are already scheduled to go out, and I'm recording more episodes, editing them as I go, but having episodes locked and loaded for a little bit. So if I need to take a break, if I need to move across the country again, when I go on on leave for my kid, I have episodes that I've already set up and set apart. But yeah, but like that studio would be the dream. I'd love to have this be my full-time job, just creating content, creating shows, creating episodes for people. But yeah, and as far as anything that I missed or anything that I want to go on deeper, I'm pretty sure I got it. Like I said, video stuff is something I'm working on. But yeah, as always, well, no, actually, I get to do this differently. So if you want to see, anytime I post, which I'm working on getting better, I do have an Instagram. It is Curious Joelcast. At the Curious Joelcast, you can see stuff there. Joel Circo on Twitter, which I don't have a lot of wherewithal to try and go on there right now, but I still say it. There's other places. Sorry. Yeah, so Instagram, you can always email me. No one's ever done that, but I still put in there just in case. CuriousJoelcast@gmail.com. And then, like I said, if you really like what you're listening to, you really want to support me, I really do encourage you to go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com. I believe it's / Curious Joel. You can search me up on Patreon. I show up as Curious Joel, same logo. But you can find a lot of stuff about me for, $5 a month. That's less than most coffees. Well, I guess an average coffee costs, which I know is kind of a worn out thing, but it's true. Like, it doesn't cost much to support me. And then you get a lot of stuff. You get to have feedback on the show that you like. You get to help support me and what I'm doing to help me invest in my future. So please go check that out. But Instagram is my primary thing. Patreon, email me, find me wherever you. I'm all over the place. So go check me out, please. Thank you all so much for listening to me interview me, go on a rant, and just kind of talk about everything. I really do appreciate it. So thank you all for listening. And until next time, stay curious, y'all.